Hello, this is the Disaster Recovery Pro, and this is my video series discussing key topics in information technology with a focus on disaster recovery and business continuity. In today's video, we'll be talking about disaster recovery and small businesses. Why does an established small business or a new startup that may be little more than one person with a laptop and a checkbook need to be thinking about business continuity and recovery? What kind of approach would be appropriate for a small business to use to build and maintain a recovery program? And what are the immediate and future benefits of building recovery and continuity practices into your small business? In the following slides, we'll show our answers to these questions that are based on some of the best practices used by large enterprise-class businesses, but will simplify and streamline the concepts to better fit a small business with fewer resources who are probably not all that familiar with these ideas and methodologies. Let's start by asking why a small business should spend their time and money on building recovery and continuity practices now rather than later on when they are bigger and have more resources to use on the problem. The first and most obvious answer is a matter of risk management. While a small business, especially a startup, may not be exposed to the same kind of risks that a large enterprise would and are less likely to experience a serious business disruption, the impact of those disruptions, especially for something like a cybersecurity attack, can be devastating. The calculus behind this is very simple. A large established business will typically have more cash reserves to ride out a disruption like a hacking attempt or a physical issue such as a fire or a flood. A larger business will have more resources in terms of people and expertise to draw on to deal with a disruption, and is even likely to have a more firmly established reputation so that the public relations impact on attracting new business is not as severe. All in all, a disruption that would be a temporary setback to a larger business may very well be fatal to a small business or a startup. Another compelling argument is that most small businesses do not intend to stay small forever. Businesses need to grow over time in order to stay viable, and the monetary stakes at risks and your exposure to risk only increase over time as you grow. At some point, you may have to answer to investors or shareholders who want assurances that your business is able to survive when things go wrong. Maybe you expand and add a line of business that has regulatory and compliance requirements for demonstrating business continuity capabilities, or develop the need for business insurance policies that require proof of recoverability. By the time this happens, your business will have grown in complexity, so the problem and expense of starting a recovery program from scratch will have increased greatly. Starting a program now while you are small and not particularly complex, and building it on good basic practices, even if it's in a very informal way, means that you'll have a base on which to build organically as you grow. So by the time you need a well-organized, formal recovery program, you will have most of the groundwork already done, and you'll have benefited from reduced risk along the way. In general, if you design your technology assets and your business processes with recovery in mind already, you'll end up with a much more effective recovery program that is much easier to implement and grow than if you try and tack it on later. So how would you go about building and maintaining a recovery program in an organized manner that follows some sort of standard that can grow with your business and eventually fall into a more formal, large-scale model? This is actually not as difficult as it sounds. All you really need to do is adopt a loose, common sense framework. What we're looking at is a very basic, simplified continuous improvement loop. This is, in essence, the kind of model that far more complicated business process development models are built around or make extensive use of. Big businesses use complex process engineering or service management frameworks such as Six Sigma or ITIL, but they're all really based around this idea of continuous improvement. For a smaller, less complex business, this idea can be very easily applied. It's almost a matter of common sense, just made a little bit more formal. The core idea is that you divide up the process of building a business or technology process, such as disaster recovery, as a constantly looping process with one cycle through the loop feeding and driving the next. You'll have specific goals that you want to hit through each cycle, and the outcome, success or fail, feeds into the next round through the cycle where you look to add more capability or improve capabilities that you already have. This means that you don't have to solve every problem in one shot. You can set your goals to tackle one aspect of a problem or get a very general outline of a process built and working, and then you can tackle other parts of the problems, filling gaps, and refine things in future cycles. It's important to have realistic, achievable goals at each cycle that build on the lessons learned in the previous cycles. In this diagram, I'm describing 4 phases. You may have seen other models that have more or less, and you can use them as you see fit, but these are the essential phases as I see it that are important to have. Planning, also called discovery, implement, test, and analyze. The idea is that the output of each phase is the input of the next, with the final output of the analyze phase used as input towards the next planning phase. Each phase does exactly what its name implies. In planning or discovery, you're setting your goals and performing your due diligence to find the information and resources you need for the next cycle. In implement, that's where you take those plans, flesh out all the details, and actually build the technology or service features that you identified during planning. Testing is where you formally test what you've built. In the context of disaster recovery, this is where you would perform your disaster recovery drills, where you simulate an outage and run through your recovery plan. Finally, in the analyze phase, we look at the test results, see how they stack up against the stated goals, report on the outcome, and formally state recommendations for future development and lessons learned. This report then gets fed back into the next planning phase, where you can actually address the issues raised and take on net new development. Again, when your business is small, this kind of feedback loop is easy to adopt with a little extra work. The key is documenting what you are planning and what you are implementing, how and what you're testing, and what the results are. Since we're talking about a small business that may not have staff with strict experience in these areas, you may very well be hiring an outside consultant or contractor to perform some or all of these tasks. If you can present and manage the process, give them clear goals and objectives at each stage, you will already be adopting service management policies that will be invaluable when and if you grow into a larger business. Start small with achievable goals, focus on having a sound process framework to follow, and your business will avoid some of the growing pains that can hinder your growth. This continuous improvement philosophy is useful for more than just recovery. It is a sound basis for building and managing almost any business process, technology, or application development project, or even used as a change management process. You simply tackle a smaller, achievable portion of the problem, evaluate what you've accomplished, and use that feedback to build upon. And repeat this process infinitely, making improvements at every step of the way, even if it's a small improvement, and let it add up over time. In the next few slides, we'll take a look at a suggested breakdown of the activities that make up each phase in this cycle. Again, this is not a hard and fast standard, but it's kind of a simplified suggestion that can be used with minimal difficulty. So let's take a look at each of the 4 phases and how we're going to pass information from one phase to the other. It's very easy to get into too much detail here, so I'm going to try and simplify it and just focus on what the output of each phase is and how it feeds into the next phase. In the planning phase, we'll be gathering information. This is doing our due diligence, making sure that we understand the technology architecture of your business, possibly through a technology architecture report. We'll review or perhaps perform a new business impact analysis report or something like it. And we'll just generally probe the business for information about how it uses its technology and make sure that we understand the layout. Most importantly, we'll want to establish and clearly document what the goals of this development cycle are. We're going to want to establish when we want those goals done, give a timeline, and we're going to want to come up with the high-level design of how we're going to do it. This is not a very detailed plan, but it should have the big picture of what we're going to do. If the goal is to do backups for our website and be able to recover it, Maybe the high-level design will be something like have a cloud storage account where we copy all of our website data to in a secure manner, and the ability to restore that data back to the web server. So the high-level design will both verbalize that and probably draw a picture of what that would look like and what the components needed would be. And these work products will be used as the basis for the implementation phase. The goal of the implement phase will be to take the work product from the plan stage and bring it into reality. First, we're going to come up with our detailed technical plan. That will be taking the high-level design and the goals, informed by all the information that we've gathered during the planning phase, and turn that into a detailed technical plan where we fleshed it out with all the details that we need to know in order to build our service. We'll also want to produce detailed technical documentation and procedures. How does the solution work? What are the procedures that you have to follow day to day to operate it? What are the procedures that you have to follow when you're going to execute a recovery? Those have to be written out in detail so that any technical team can follow them and operate the service as intended. Next, we'll perform the actual realization, which is where we'll build our service. It may be a service, it may be a process, it may be technology, or a little of all three. We'll also want to have some sort of quality assurance check and a backout plan so that we can normalize things if something goes horribly wrong during our build out. This isn't an exhaustive QA check. This is really a check to make sure that we haven't interfered with other systems that our business may be depending on. The test phase is where we really do a deep dive and find out if our service and the documentation and procedures we've come up with to operate it all work. We'll come up with a test and validation plan. What are we going to test? How are we going to prove that it works? This is all going to be based on the documentation and procedures that we came up with during the implementation phase. We'll actually execute that test. In the context of a disaster recovery, this is where we would maybe simulate an outage of our web server, recover it and render it operational again, make sure that it's working properly. And of course, put things back to normal operations when we're done. Most importantly, we'll want to document all the issues and resolutions we encountered, all the lessons learned, all the weaknesses and strengths that we noticed during our test execution, and make sure that we have a very clear and detailed record of what actually happened during the test. In the analyze phase, we bring everything together. We're mostly focusing on the outcome of the test and evaluating it. So the first task will be to determine the success or failure of the test and each of the goals and objectives established for it. We'll want to document all of the lessons learned and issues that we discovered during the test. We'll want to have a remediation plan for anything that needs to be fixed immediately. And we'll want to make recommended next steps. What's the next step in development and improvement of this service? We'll want to document all this in a nice formal report that we can carry forward and use for the basis of a future planning cycle. There may be significant lag time between your analyze phase and the start of your next planning phase, so it's really important to get good, accurate, and complete documentation before we close out the analyze phase. This is really critical because this output is what's going to drive the next cycle through the continuous improvement process. When we loop around again and start the next planning phase, this report should be part of the information gathering that we do or discovery that we do at the beginning of our planning phase. The key to making all of this work is taking the results produced by the analyze phase and using them to drive a new planning phase. This second cycle may or may not address every issue flagged, but should have that information available in order to prioritize and pick and choose what to address next. The end result is that you can evolve a system from a very basic, bare-bones state into something that's very robust, efficient, and packed with functionality over time rather than realizing it all at once. You want to avoid trying to boil the ocean, as the saying goes, by attempting to build a very complete and complex recovery program all in one shot. This is likely to be a demoralizingly large task for a small business to even think about taking on, and it's likely to fail and consume unreasonable amounts of resources and funds. By picking and choosing to build an achievable piece of the puzzle at every step, and building on the findings and lessons learned in your next round of development spreads out the expenditures of money and effort in a much more manageable way. As your business grows, you'll be able to take on larger problems and have the benefit of a strong base of well-developed systems to build them on. You'll have a history of how you progressed that you can reference for ideas on other projects and initiatives, or even use to bring new staff up to speed on how you've developed to where you are now. As you grow and eventually find yourself at a point where you need to satisfy specific audit requirements for your systems, you'll have a base of documentation to use and a process that you can plug audit concerns into, extending the benefits from using this framework far beyond the specific process, technology, or services you've been developing. In terms of disaster recovery, you can gradually build up your program using this approach. First, start with a basic, straightforward goal that addresses a specific problem, then use the lessons learned to direct your next round of improvements. Maybe you start by implementing backup and recovery for one thing, one piece of technology, maybe just your financial records or just your website, and add other components to the plan as you go through future cycles. Remember that you don't have to solve every problem at once. Choose reasonable, achievable goals at each step, and don't be afraid to start with smaller, modest goals. You'll find that you can use the lessons learned there to take on more expansive and ambitious projects that grow along with your business. You may never be able to boil the ocean all at once, but if you boil one bucket at a time, you'll get there eventually. So while we focused more on good business processes and practices rather than disaster recovery itself, it's very important to make sure that you're building your disaster recovery program on strong foundations, which I believe this framework will give you. So I hope you take away lots of ideas from this presentation that you can apply not just to your recovery program, but to your business as a whole. Thanks for watching today's presentation. If you found this topic interesting and you want to learn more about disaster recovery and business continuity, you can help support the channel by leaving a comment to tell me what you thought about it, clicking like on the video, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you won't miss out on my next video. Your support and feedback is very important, so thank you for watching and supporting the channel, and have a great day.